Yeah. What's up, Joe? What, sorry? Our men's club they're doing stuff over there. Yeah, you can find them. They may be packing. Our men's club are packing. That's a whole different, very loud. I'm going to use the microphone only because it's very loud. Whoa. Only because if we're video streaming, whatever, that they'll pick it up. Very omnipotent. That's how it is. I use this at home, by the way. We have a sound system. It's now with my kids. You know, God gives rabbis kids, right? Kids to rabbis in order to teach them humility. That's absolutely. I'm sure for every parent it's the same thing. Isn't it like, you know, you're such a big shot doctor at work, you come home and like children, they just like tear you apart. That's what they do. It's right. Just introduce yourself. We're going to go around. I want you to give your name, and I have like series of 3 different questions I want to explore as we open up the topic, right? If you don't know what you're doing here, we're not packing Mashawa candles. Our topic tonight is, can you be a bad person and still be a good Jew? Be a bad person, still be a good Jew. So just give your name, go around and you give your name, and then how long you've been a member here at Temple Aliyah, or if you're just visiting this year. And what you're here tonight for. Like, what do you hope to learn, or what the question that you have? You go ahead. 36 years. We're going to start with the top dog. That's what we just did there. All right, 36 years. Okay. All right, good. So that's what we're going to do. All right? You cannot be a bad person and a good Jew. That's it. Let's go home. Linda just gave us the answer. All right, but we'll talk about what does that mean. So I have a couple other questions. Go ahead. Okay, so just the dialogue of ideas. Okay, good. Okay, Yosela. That's right. But I was not here yet. That's right. So what question, or why did you come tonight? Yeah, why did you come to this discussion? So this is like a kibbutz. At the end of the day, everybody gathers together. Whatever they do, they do. I know, except you normally sit over there, but I thank you for sitting there. Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. Right? What's the name of it? Richard couldn't hear you. Celia? So it's like, hey, dude, hanging, like, you know. See, and why? Okay. So you've been coming, you're doing, what are you teaching? But we're hoping for that, by the way. All right, so here's the next question I want to ask you. What does it mean for you being a good Jew? Like when you hear that term, good Jew, what does that mean? Hearing. Okay? Observing basic commandments. Right, by the way, if you're an Orthodox synagogue, I think the first thing to answer is, right, observing mitzvot. right? To observe mitzvot. That would make you a good Jew. Okay, but no, but basic ones. Right, so we'll talk about it later in terms of what our basic ones may be. We might get there. Okay. Love justice. Okay, we're going to get to Micah. Okay, we're going to quote the prophet Micah, and so which is one of Linda's favorite prophets. What does it mean to be a good Jew, Yossi? Aside from coming from kibbutz, what does it mean? You have to live in Israel to be a good Jew? So we're all bad Jews? It's just not good Jews. Just not good ones. A good Jew would be one who lives in Israel. Okay. All right. So good. Talk about good Jews. Go ahead. Richard, what does it mean to be a good Jew? So caring. That's right. You started caring. Lori? To care about people as much as so. You shall love your neighbors yourself, which we're going to talk a little bit as well too. See you? Be helpful. Okay, caring and be helpful to others. So is there a distinction between, my next question is, and I'm not sure, I was wondering what you would respond. What's the difference between be a good Jew and to be a mensch? Or is there no difference? So, right, I mean, I think we'd say good, a mensch, literally German Yiddish, a man, or to be like a good person. I think that's how you translate mensch, right? To be a good person. Pretty much what a lot of people, you're the one who threw in a couple of the mitzvot, right, Scott? But Linda's it the same thing, a good Jew and a mensch? So the Ten Commandments and the ethical laws are the backbone of Western civilization. And that is the definition of a mensch and a good Jew. So we also had this session. You have to be, I believe in God to be a good Jew. Right, I mean, is that, okay? Right, so I think it's interesting that when we step out of this idea of mitzvot and observance, do we really have a distinction between a good Jew and a mensch? Right? I mean, I saw you when I asked the question, Linda, you go like, oh. Right? Oh, so that's interesting. Usually what my understanding is in terms of usage, it's not usually about, you say giving, you don't financially or? Yeah, so it's interesting, the whole idea in our Jewish tradition about grading people. That's what we want to talk about. Is there a grading scale of which, like, you're a good person, you're a fair person, right? You're a not so good person, you're like a bad person, right? Do we grade people? Mensch seems to be like I think the highest level. And by the way, the rabbis talk about when they talk about four characters. Some of you know this in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, where it says that there are four different calibers of people, right? There's the tzaddik, right? And there's an Oni, and they talk about the one who says, what is mine, and what's yours is yours. Right? And so what's the Sadiq? Right? It's the one who says, they say, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, but then they say it's really the Benoni, an intermediate one, because in truth, like when it comes to possessions, like we can't exist. Like what's yours is yours, what's mine is mine. We have to do that. You can't just give away everything. Right? And so does anybody truly give away everything? If you have to, by the way, do you know there's a law in Tzedakah you can't give away all of your money? You can't give away all your money. Why? Because you can't become a burden on the community. Right? You have to be able to take care of yourself as well. So they understood. It's interesting. Right? They want you to help others, but also to understand that you have to live a life. So this idea of what does it mean to be a good Jew, we're going to get there in a moment, and is it different from a mensch? Now, the Torah, I think you all know here, has lots of laws in it. We say 613 mitzvot. And there's no distinction made between the ethical laws and the observance, like the ritual laws. They are interwoven into the Torah. No distinction. In fact, Scott, we don't make any distinction. Who talked about 10 Commandments? Linda, you did. So do the rabbis elevate the 10 Commandments above the other 603 commandments? No. And then you'd think that they're the most important ones. So why didn't the rabbis, by the way, the Christians did. Anybody know why the Christians elevated the 10 Commandments above the other 603? Why it's still very much a part of the Christian tradition? Linda, do you remember? Yes and no, that Jesus did away with requiring, right, but they still held on to some. Why? But why they hold on to those 10, though, is because, according to the Torah, by the way, they're the only ones given directly by God to humanity, to the Jewish people. Everything else is seen as being a different category. The 10 Commandments used to be part of the Jewish prayer experience, by the way. It used to be in the morning service, and they took it out, probably during the time of the development of the Judeo-Christians, right? The Jews who believe in Jesus as the Messiah. And they took it out because they were elevating the 10 Commandments above everything else. And so, Scott, they didn't want to decide, this goes back to your point, what are the basic commandments? They didn't want us thinking, oh, that one's more important than that one. Isn't that interesting? So they wanted us to look at all of them as being on equal footing. Now, certainly the ethical ones are woven in there. And so when you think of the most ethical laws given in the Torah, what do you think of course? What's the golden rule? Right? What's the golden rule? Well, don't do somebody else what they would not have to do. By the way, that's not how it says in the Torah. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, he knows his Hebrew, means love your neighbor as yourself. But Hillel translated differently. Right? Hillel translated exactly as, right, to teach, here it is. By the way, story of where a pagan, a potential convert, comes to him and says, right, what does he tell him to do? To Hillel, he says, teach me all the Torah while standing on one foot. And what he says is not v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, right? Al ta'aseh lechavercha, right? Don't do to your neighbor as you would not, that which is hateful to you, do not do to another. By the way, then he says, that's the entire Torah. Zil, Gomor, and learn. So since Hillel wants to see the most important law as being an ethical one. And out of all of the laws, that's the essence of it. Micah, I want to quote now from the prophet. Micah says this. Hold on. All right, and God has told you, O man, what is good? What does the Lord require of you? Only to do justice, to love goodness, to walk humbly with your God. Those are the three things. Do justice, love goodness, walk modestly with God. Nothing about ritual observance. right? And then, by the way, so anybody know the foundations of the Reform movement in terms of it was referred to as prophetic Judaism? Those are the early foundations. It's called prophetic Judaism. Anybody know why? And you spent some time in the Reform movement, right? Do you remember? The ethical leading to the prophets, and therefore, right, what's the purpose of Judaism? Right, they take on Yom Kippur, many of you know this, okay, where it says, and when we fasted, did you not see? When we starved our bodies, did you pay no heed? Because on your fast day, you see to your business, oppress all your labors. Because you fast in strife and contention, and you strike with a wicked fist, your fasting today is not such as make your voice heard on high, and such that I fast desire, a day for men to starve. No, this is not what I desire. I do not want your fasts for this. Now, Reform Judaism took this, by the way, and said the purpose of mitzvot is to create the ethical human being. And if you're an ethical human being, you don't need the mitzvot. You don't need the ritual. Now, early on, they threw out all the ritual. Some of you may remember going to Reform synagogues growing up, right, 40 years ago or so or more. And was anybody wearing a kippah? No kippot, no talitot. And it's not generally rabbis too, rabbis especially, right? As we say in Hebrew, dafka, right? The rabbis didn't wear them. Are you familiar with that, Celia? Do you have that history of So you went to Reform synagogue, and were people wearing kippot and talit in services then, or no? Interesting. By your time, maybe. Early on, they didn't. So why do you think the Reform movement changed? They've changed their stance, by the way, and they've come back to ritual. Why? Because rituals were the vehicle, were part of how to get there, and if you took them out completely, you lost the sense of the Jewish part. And that's I want to talk about the difference between, right, a good Jew, if you will, and a mensch. Right? There's specifically a Jewish component about that. I found a source when I was preparing for this that was interesting. By Yehuda Loew of Ben Bezalel. He's a 16th century mystic, and known, by the way, the Maharal of Prague. Has to do with the golem and all those things. Any of you ever been to Prague? Been to Prague or no? Yeah. Did you go visit like where the golem was born, kind of? Yeah, it was. Yeah. They have. In fact, Rodi and I went to this time. We went to a house where they claim like it all began, kind of, and you can buy like a little golem with Hebrew letters on it. And so, do you know what the golem is? The golem is by the way, we understand this as being the inspiration for Superman, right? Is that was made out of earth, and and he stayed basically inanimate, if you will, state, except when the Jews needed him, and then they would awaken him with special formula and blessings, and he would come up when there was like anti-Semitism and problems, and he would save everybody, and then he'd go back to this animate state. That's the golem. It's fascinating. And there are those who actually, because by the way, Superman, right? The idea Übermensch, which is the German, sounds a lot more nefarious when you say it that way, right? Übermensch, but that's the direct translation of Superman. And the idea of it being somebody who, like the Jews look to for salvation. So anyway, this is the Maharal, who said, he quotes a midrash, in which he says, one sage, Ben Zoma, posits that the Shema is the most important verse of the Torah, belief in one God. Another sage, Ben Nanas, offers, love your neighbors yourself. But neither are accepted. Then Shimon ben Pazai offers this verse from the portion of Pinchas. Get this one. One lamb shall you offer in the morning, and the other shall you offer at evening. The offering of sacrifice in the morning and the evening. So why? Maharal explains this. The most important verse in the Torah points us to the intentional, daily, consistent behavior. In this case, offering a sacrifice both morning and evening, using the example of the ancient sacrificial offering, which demanded careful attention to every detail of the process. The Torah directs us to set a course of action to follow it, renewing our commitment day after day. Isn't that interesting? Like somehow you had to have a ritual of which you were giving of yourself. Right? Is that part of, I think you're talking about, right, so in terms of like sharing, being, and giving? Right? I think that's an important piece of, like, what does it mean to be a good Jew? I want to suggest, by the way, go off track just a little bit and come back. You read many stories in newspapers about the most religious of Jews doing bad things. And how do you and how do they validate that? Can they? So they do it out of weakness, you're saying. They're human beings. But do you know there's an idea that sometimes you're allowed to violate the law in order to do a higher good. Bernie Madoff did not know, but by the way, there are plenty of other examples, by the way, of, let's say, of in certain communities that will remain nameless, of where, in terms of how they utilize donations, or what they do in terms of school systems, right? Taking them over and utilizing state funds for very specific Jewish causes rather than for their intended purposes originally. And by the way, this is in English we would translate as, if you remember, if you go back to cults. Remember the cults in the 1980s and 90s? Lots of cults. And they used to talk about heavenly deception. You ever hear that term, heavenly deception? That's when you deceive people for a higher cause. Now, by the way, Jewish religious people take the model of Jacob tricking Isaac. Right? Jacob tricked his father Isaac out of the blessing. So they actually, Richard, will validate and to say not only it's not about weakness, what they'll say is sometimes in order to do a higher good, you can violate certain laws. That's something. And we would say, I think everybody here would say, like, that's wrong. Would everybody agree? So you're allowed to save a life. Saving a life, you can violate, right? There's 3 things that you can't do, but you can violate any law to save a life. We're not talking about saving a life, though. So you want to say you can violate a law for a higher good. Okay, and you have an example? Oh, milking, right? Right. So again, so here, right, he didn't, I don't think, nobody would say that Milken sort of tried to validate what he did for religious purposes, right? He gave, by the way, he gave long before he was accused of any crimes, continued to give afterwards. But Scott, when you say that you're, like, you can think of, you know, in your mind, like, sure, you can violate the law sometimes. By the way, we're not talking about, let's say, Nazi Germany, where there's a law to, let's say, ship off Jews, and you're going to violate the law. I don't know if that's what you're thinking about. Because those we would say are bad laws. Okay, but you can imagine some theoretical. So by the way, you're allowed to tell a white lie in Jewish tradition. Right? We've studied this, Linda. You're allowed to tell a white lie. You don't always have to tell the truth. Right? You know this. Because if your wife asks you, right, does this look good on me? What's the answer? You look fantastic. So by the way, the rabbis in the Talmudic example is, right, what about a bride on her wedding day? What if she doesn't look so good? And she says, how do I look? You look beautiful, because by the way, for the rabbis, every bride on her wedding day is beautiful. And they said you're allowed, as long as there's no other ill effect, you can tell a white lie. As long as no one else is being harmed. But in these cases, right, they're deciding what a higher good is. By the way, sometimes it means helping the Jewish people as opposed to the non-Jewish world. You're helping the Jewish world, that's better. And so we struggle with this idea about about it. And the rabbis of the Talmud, very clear, by the way, the rabbis establish a principle. The Aramaic is dina de malchuta dina. The law of the land is the law. The rabbis knew that when you lived in a country, remember, they were in diaspora, that if you were going to live as good citizens, you had to observe the law, and you were not about reinterpreting it. To be a good Jew and to be a good citizen. Interesting? They understood that. But it's interesting. I want to look for a moment at the term good Jew itself. Because in truth, there is no such term as a good Jew. We have a Yiddish expression, even if you say a gute Yid, there's no historical context for that. We take it, my understanding is, from the idea of a good Christian. What's a good Christian? What's a good Christian? No, but for a Christian, it's very clear. Belief. Believe in Jesus as your Savior, and you're a good Christian. Now, by the way, in the Catholic Church, not only do you have to have belief in Jesus as your Savior, you have to have baptism, you have to belong to the church. Right? Once you do that, you're a good Catholic. The what, sorry? They believe in good works, but it's interesting, does that make you a good Christian or not? Well, that's interesting. Could you be a good Catholic in belief and belonging? I don't know. I don't know whether. Again, does it make you a great Catholic or a good Catholic? Right? And Jews, and here's the thing, we're not used to great. We never had, like the idea of a Jew who didn't observe, like let's go back to, Middle Ages, like somebody who didn't observe Jewishly, like we don't have a term, they're not a bad Jew. The only term we have is when somebody steps out of the tradition, right? When they reject Judaism, when they accept another religion, they become an apostate. But by the way, still always a Jew. Can't get out, and it's like, you know what Jewish hell is? Jewish hell is where you're still a Jew, but you have no benefits. Right? That's right. Right? That's Jewish hell because you can never, you still get all the worst parts of being Jewish, and there's no benefits. You're not counted in the minyan. You can't be part of the community. They're not going to help you at all, but you're still a Jew. Christianity, again, you take away, you don't have that. So I want to pray, first of all, challenge the whole notion of, is there such a thing as a... I'm not sure that there really is such a thing as a good Jew. So again, the mensch is a good person. So that's where Linda was trying to think about. Is there a difference between a mensch and a good Jew? You know what? We might call somebody like a non-Jew, that person's a mensch also. By the way, I think the definition would be by the Jewish understanding of what it means to be a mensch. What it means to be a good person. I think we would still apply those criteria. Not necessarily belief in anything Jewish or doing Jewish things, but the idea of what it means to act in that way. In order to be a good Jew, you have to be a good person first. Okay? To be a good Jew, you have to be a good person first. Jonathan Pollard, right, who was, right, accused of espionage, right. Right. To be a good person, so, yes? Okay, so potentially, right? Is what he shared, was it really compromising of America, by the way, and its security? Probably not in the end. Don't know all. But the idea of espionage, right, is totally something. Correct. And so we might judge somebody, it's interesting, who violates law, but again, that law we'd have to decide whether it's a good law or not, right? If it's to the detriment of, right, if somebody wasn't sharing something with Israel that's detrimental to its well-being, but is not, by the way, harming other people, right? Could that essentially be okay? Again, it's problematic. By the way, conservative rabbis, I know for sure, many rabbis who are in the armed forces are very uncomfortable with the Jonathan Pollard situation because they never want to be thought of as having any sense of dual loyalty, right? So somebody who, right, in any way violates the oath of their military status should receive those kinds of punishments, right? Because there can be no, right, and these are everything, right, that a certain congresswoman, right, is accusing Jews of in terms of dual loyalty, right, is not, right, there is no dual loyalty that way. So the Pollard case is a little bit different in that regard in terms of what does it mean to be a good person. But by the way, you could argue that it's a bad law that puts Israel at disadvantage. Nazi, right, Germany, you say you can't observe laws, right, that, if you will, that, right, are this and a detriment of any given people. But I want to go to, for a moment, we want to talk about the things that are most important in terms of the Jewish, in terms of the Torah tradition. And so we might talk about the things that we're commanded to love. Right? In the Torah, we're only commanded to love 3 things. Right? Anybody remember the 3 things? Well, one of them you know. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. You have to love your neighbor. Right? Linda, what's another one that you have to love? God. V'ahavta, you shall love the Lord your God. And who? Not yourself. You don't have to love your parents. The Torah is very, what? Not even Torah? You have to love, you know, this, Linda, you kick yourself. Love the stranger. The hafta tager. And by the way, love the stranger. And by the way, 36 times in the Torah, more than anything else, other than loving God, you're commanded to, I think actually more than loving God, you have to love the stranger. 36 times it's mentioned in the Torah. Parents, you have to honor and respect. Fear a little bit, depending on how you look at that word. But it's interesting the parents are out of that. And why, right? Why those 3 things? Right? And what does it mean then to be, if you will, a good person in the Jewish concept? Right? See, that's how I want to understand for a moment. I want to bring it to a moment which you say, what does it mean to be, if you will, take that good Jew term, which I'm not sure is really applicable, but let's leave it there. So the 3 things we're supposed to love. Right? So why are we commanded to love your neighbor? Right? Why are you commanded to love your neighbor? You can't covet your neighbor's possessions, his wife, ass, any of those things, right? But you don't have to, right? But you have to love your neighbor. What? It helps society, good. So the importance of community. You have to love your neighbor because of the importance of community. What else? Why else do you think the neighbor? Basis for civilization, good. What else about loving your neighbor? It can be challenging. Right, 4 a.m., right? By the way, sometimes it's hard to love your neighbor when they're so close to you. Sometimes distance makes the heart grow fonder. So loving your neighbor, right? Isn't that interesting? That's one element of what it means to be a good person, is to get along with those people around you, and that you can create a community, you can create society. Now, loving a stranger. Why do you think that's specific? What is a stranger, by the way, in the Torah? Anybody know what the stranger? Stranger is very specific. The word ger, by the way, in modern Hebrew, what is a ger referred to as? Someone who converts, but not in the Torah. It's not a convert. The rabbis later used that term for somebody who's a convert, or what we call Jew by choice. But what is a ger in the Torah? Anybody know? The ger is the resident alien. They're the outsider, but who live in your community. And by the way, it says, Mishpat echad yeh lechem, there should be one law for the stranger and the homeborn alike. Stranger. Right. Oh, I saw this, right? Just the block down here, right? There's a homeless individual who sort of lives on the, and I saw him stop by the police actually the other day as well. I just noted him quite recently. But the stranger, by the way, is not the homeless. The stranger is somebody who simply is a foreigner, but who lives in your community. Why do you think we're told to love that person? Because we might be a stranger, and if we go someplace else, we want people to accept us. Good. What else? Out of yourself. What does that mean? So things besides your group. It wants you to say, not to be focused just about your immediate group. And by the way, we tend to hang around people that we're comfortable with. Good. What else? Linda, you had one? So, and by the way, they are categorized, the stranger, in terms of being, if you will, vulnerable. The stranger is often put in with the orphan and the widow, of people who don't seem to have a system, a support system to take care of them. Good. What else might be about why a command to love a stranger? So that's the motivation, by the way. And we're going to talk a little bit more Passover in just a couple of minutes. But we didn't plan on it. The downside of it being tonight so close to Passover is that people are working on Passover and we're sort of in vacation mode. But only after it was said, and only as I started preparing for tonight, that I realized the connection, right? Which often happens. And so the idea of, that's the motivation. We were once strangers, and we were oppressed, and so that's wrong. But what is it about strangers that create problems in a society? Because they fear of the stranger, xenophobia, right? The fear of the unknown, the fear of the stranger, that is a really hard thing to overcome. It's hard. Think about all the things that, right, and all the challenges, Richard, that we have today in terms of changing values, right? When we see, it's hard. You don't grow up with people of people of color. You, can be uncomfortable. There's shared values that you have with your neighbor. There's lots of shared experiences you have, even though you might get tired of them after a while. But the stranger, we wonder about their motivation. They're different than us. They think different than us. You're still supposed to... Go ahead. Of course it is. And so I believe, by the way, that the Torah, and as the rabbis interpret it, is trying to get us then to overcome that basic, if you will, human resistance sometimes, and that's why we're commanded, dafka, as we say in Hebrew, to love them. Right? It's pushing you, Scott, to get out of your comfort zone and to have to try and love. Now, it's interesting, you go back, Richard, not commanded to love parents. So, but you are commanded to love the stranger. So, and then loving God seemed kind of easy, but why? But let's open it up for a little bit. Why loving God? Why is that one of the three things that we're commanded to love? What does it mean to love God? Julia, what does that mean? Is that good? You're looking, that's what the face was? I was good, like, why is it, like, what does it mean to love God, and why is that so important? Everyone has a love of God. By the way, I don't know if you know this, when it comes to the Ten Commandments, there's a theory that, that they're actually related 1 to 6, 2 to 7, 3 to 8, 4 to 9, 5 to 10. You read them actually across, if you will, and there's a relationship. And just so, for example, like, you shall have no other gods before you, right? If you like idolatry, right? Number 2 and number 7, right? So to be unfaithful to God is idolatry. Number 7 is adultery and other sexual laws, to be unfaithful in other ways. 5 is, right, about loving, about your parents. That's not about loving, but about you shall, 4 is about you shall honor, respect your father and mother, right? And what is 9? That you shall not bear false witness. Right? And so what's the connection? I'm sorry, it's 5. 4 is Shabbat. 5 is the parents. I'm going off topic here. I didn't have this one, but it made me think. So 5 are the, right, you shall honor your parents, and it does go to coveting. So what is about relation between parents and coveting? Think of any connections? Right? There's this idea about that love when you honor your parents, right? That somehow you have a view of loving God. By the way, that's why some will argue it's on the first 5. Because loving your neighbor, honoring your parents will help you understand the larger context of God. And once you honor parents and have a context of God, in terms of coveting, right? You don't covet things anymore because you understand life in a larger context. So what does it mean to love God? It means you have a larger picture of what it means to be a human, a Jew, part of a community, and a human being. God is that piece that ties it all together. And Chad, I think that's why you were also like thinking about mitzvot and those elements. Like, what is it that leads to those values? There's got to be something, right? And so, loving of the stranger, of your neighbor, and of God. That becomes the Jewish, if you will, formula for being Jew. Questions or comments at this point? I want to tie it together. We're going to conclude. We won't be together much longer, but I want to bring in Passover a little bit to understand something. Any thoughts? Right? So Linda, it was clear to you when you came in here, you just wanted to hear, like, there's no way, right, that you can be a bad person and still be a good Jew. Right? Because one can't imagine that, and you would never want to be able to say that. But the goal tonight was to show a little bit about that progression and to show why it's not so. Right? That there are these Jewish values that are inherent in terms of what it means to be, right, ultimately a good Jew, but a mensch. Richard, what are you thinking? But that's why, so subjectivity is clearly we keep coming back to, but that's why I want to go to that love of what we're commanded to love. Because I think that becomes the essence of what does it mean. And those are here values about living together. Now we're tied together through the observance piece. By the way, religion, anybody know the Latin of this? Religio? Comes, by the way, ligaments. Means to tie people together, keep them connected. Is that interesting? Religion is designed, if you will, to bring people together. And so it's in that communal experience that goodness evolves. Goodness is evolving. And by the way, are people inherently good? We've had this talk a little bit. By the way, all I have to just look at is any 3-year-old to know that, and just not inherently good usually. Right? It's about them. It's about, right? Do kids inherently share? You've gone through lots of grandkids. Like, do they inherently share? No. You have to work hard at it, don't you? In fact, again, I love the Hebrew word dafka, right? Precisely the fact, like often with kids, it's only when someone else wants to play with their toy that they want to play with that toy. Right? Right? So at that moment, I mean, that's a remarkable thing. So I want to talk about good. I want to talk about, just for a couple minutes, the 4 sons of the Seder. So 4 children, 4 sons, they're traditionally portrayed as sons. But let's say we'll leave them as 4 children. So what are they, by the way? Give them to me in order. What's the number 1? Wise one. Okay, good. Number 2? What's the second one? The Rasha. The wicked one. Okay? By the way, the order is important. We're not going to get into tonight. But the third one is the Tam, simple one. Okay? And the fourth one is She'eino Yodeh Lishol, who doesn't know how to ask. By the way, as another aside, some have argued, I don't know if you've ever heard this, that it relates to, the comparison was made to, let's say, 4 generations. For a long time, there was a lot of things like 4 generations of American Jews. All right, so what's the wise generation? That's the generation that came here first with all the traditions. What's the wicked generation? That's the generation that rebelled. Right? They didn't want to do the Jewish things. They didn't want to speak Yiddish. They didn't want to do, right? They wanted to be Americans. The 3rd generation, the simple one, like they didn't know much. By the time you get to the 4th generation, they don't even know what to ask. Interesting generational kind of continuity. Isn't that scary? Kind of follows through. But I just want to figure out, if you have a wise son, right, what should be the opposite of that? The ignorant or dumb one, which we don't have. And if you have a wicked one, what would be the opposite of that? A good one. And we don't have a good one. Now, by the way, you could argue that the ignorant one is maybe the one who doesn't know how to ask. Maybe you might be able to. Some have made that comparison. But isn't it interesting? We have wicked, but not the good son. The simple one, it's interesting, by the way. The Hebrew is really great. The Hebrew tam, we translate as simple, but tam really doesn't mean simple in that sense. In the Torah, tam is used to describe Noah. The words are, Noah haya ish sadik, tamim haya bedorotav. Noah was a righteous man, ish tamim sadik haya, a righteous and full, simple person. Tam means can be pure as well. Right? Tam can be somebody who's just so pure. By the way, sometimes, right, when I'm dealing with, especially, by the way, adults who have, let's say, whether it is lower IQ, whether it is special needs, right? I often look at that group who are so pure of heart, right? They just goodness, there's no filter, right? It's all hugging and things like that. I often look that's the Tom. It's just pure goodness coming out. And so Tom is interesting, right? The one who doesn't know how to ask, I mean, he's clueless, right? That's probably what that one would be. But we don't have a good son, right? We have a wise son. We might have an ignorant one. We have a wicked one. So why don't we have a good son? So what's the answer, by the way, given to the wicked son? Right? Let's take the wise son. What's the answer when they ask, what are all these laws? By the way, in the real Hebrew, why do we say that the wicked son is wicked? Let's go back there when you explain it. Because why? What are these laws to you? And not to us. But by the way, the question also asked by the wise son is the same question. Do you know that? It's actually changed in many English Haggadot. You'll have to look at your Haggadah. When you go through the 4 questions, I want you to read them in English, and does yours change it? And if you look at the Hebrew, and those of you who lead, for you it's easy, you're going to see, if they're really true to the Hebrew, it's the same language to you. Yeah, it's very, but they say that the wise son still says, right, you answer him, what's the answer to the wise son? What are all these laws to you? What do you answer him with? Right, you explain to him the mitzvot. You explain to him, right, all of the commandments, including the fact that you don't eat after the afikomen, right? And that's part of it. And what does it mean then in terms of explaining for them? It means to be wise. It means to observe the mitzvot. They understand things through the mitzvot. But I want to argue that that's not the case of being good, because they're not described as being good, only wise. Right? To be wise, right, means to know the laws, but knowing the laws doesn't make you a good person. We don't have the good person in there. We don't have the good son or the good child. And I think because it's a hard question to answer. Right, Richard? I think it's what you're talking about. There's subjectivity. What does it mean to be good? And yet we call the wicked one wicked. Now I want to segue in. Why is that person wicked? Because they take themselves out of the community. Right? They aren't part of you, and they've taken themselves out. Now think about the first 2 of the things you're commanded to love. Neighbor, stranger, that means to be part of that community. Once you've taken yourself out, can't be good. So, to be good, by the way, can you be good on your own? If you live on a desert island, can you be good? What does it mean to be good? Isn't that, it's a moot point. Why? Goodness requires you in interaction and connection with other people. That's the point. Isn't that, well, you're saying, judge yourself like, oh, I'm a bad person for doing this. But even if you, for example, I guess maybe you could be, right, if you had a desert island with animals, and you were kind to those animals, with no everybody else judging, you might be able to say that you shared good qualities, but it's in relationship to something else. Goodness is an act that has to have an effect. It means you're in a relationship with something. Goodness is a relationship to something. It's not by yourself. Now, by the way, you could be good. By the way, Linda, you should think about, if you're on a desert island, could you be good only with, right? In what way could one person think of themselves as being good? No animals on this island. A plant, like how you treat the earth, abusing it, right? Or are you caring for it? Right? You could be a good person because you care for, right? But it means you have to be in a relationship to something. And so, mitzvot, the idea of observing them, is usually not in relationship to something else. Right? Ritual commandments, certainly. Right? Observing Shabbat doesn't have to be in relationship to anybody else. Saying Kiddush, lighting candles. So while mitzvot are important, the true value of what it means to be Jewish is going to be in relationship to something else, and that's going to take you up to a higher level. And for me, that's why you can't be, right, a bad person, still be a good Jew, because you've rejected the essence of what it's all about. It's in relationship. And once your relationship is bad, that takes you out what it means to be Jewish context. So you can be an observant person. You can observe mitzvot, but it can't, you've taken yourself into the category. Any questions? This is sort of like where I came to the conclusion, you can see in terms of Linda wanting to draw it all together. Any thoughts or questions or anything about it? I don't expect questions. Something or a question? You probably will. Happiness. Right? But again, remember, happiness is a whole different level. You can be a good person without being happy. Of course, look, happiness is an ultimate goal. We've talked about happiness, right, in other times. I don't want to go there, but I think I agree with you. So let's tie it together here just for a moment. Tie it together is if you think about, if you've studied Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, we ask a lot. There's that one of the Mishnayot. We ask like, who is Ezehu Hacham? Who is wise? And what's the answer? Who learns from other people. Right? And we even ask Ezehu Sameach, who is, right? Ezehu Ashir, right? Who is wealthy. A Sameach Behalko, who is satisfied with their lot in life. By the way, I'm working on a sermon like for 10 years still in my mind about how do you buy into that idea, that value of being satisfied with what you have, and the idea of achievement. If you're completely happy with everything you have, why would you achieve for anything more? I'm still working on this. Like, what does that mean? But we don't, what? It's about what you have in life. Be satisfied with what you have, in essence. The what, sorry? You can do more for others, but the idea is very often that the motivation to have more, right, to be a better doctor, to help more people, like those are positive things. But why not try and do more and right, to gather more so that you can even help more people? But you're supposed to be happy with what you have in life, and what does it mean to grow? But we don't ask the question, Ezehu Tov, who's the good one? We don't ask the questions like, what does it mean to be good? Because for them, it lies through the mitzvot that lead to values. Those values hopefully lead to goodness, and ultimately, happiness, as you said, is that ultimate goal of feeling the sense of accomplishment of all of that. So, as you go into Pesach, as you go into Passover, I wish you a good Pesach. I wish you one of trying to, and by the way, I invite you to look at the four children, kind of explore what does it mean, each one. How do we look at different people? I know we classically teach it says, people, everybody learns differently. Everybody has a different mode, right, of understanding. You have to talk to people differently. Can you talk to your children the same way, Richard, or you have to talk to them completely differently? They don't listen anyway, but let's assume that they did, right? You talk to your kids differently. Scott, you talk to your kids differently, don't you, in terms of each one a little bit differently, or no? Yeah. Because, right, they're different people. The idea then of goodness is ultimately, what's the goal of the Passover Seder? The goal is to feel as if you yourself came out of Egypt. By the way, if you don't feel that, you're not supposed to finish the, right? You're not allowed to eat. Which is right before you eat. I don't know if you've thought about this. That's when you have the expression "Bechol dor vador." In every generation, you must feel as if you came out of Egypt right before you eat. That's the mitzvah, Richard. If you don't feel it yet, technically, you're not supposed to be eating. It's a problem. So I wish you a Pesach of goodness, of wholeness, and Chag Sameach v'Kasher. Okay, everyone? All right, it's a pleasure. Thank you. It was great. All right, I can take this off.